As a university lecturer, I have the privilege of teaching teachers who are learning to teach. And I believe every educator should have a quintessential question that guides their teaching practice. And for me, that quintessential question is, what stops us from being awake? Indeed, at the beginning of every lecture, I ask my students, are you awake? And they start straightening up in their chairs, as I can see some of you doing right now. And in awake, I mean not only that they've got their eyes open, which is a good start first thing on a Monday morning or any time on a Friday afternoon for that matter. I mean totally engaged, totally in the present moment, and totally focused and curious and very, very concentrated in their studies. And in this quest for an answer to what stops you from being awake, I've discovered three really important things. The first one is that students by nature want to be awake, but they don't really know how to be. They want to be engaged, but they don't really know how to be. And they're looking to us educators to teach them how. Secondly, teachers want to teach awake students, but they don't necessarily see that as part of their role, nor do they know really how to necessarily bring that awake state to them. And the third thing is that I believe in education we've settled for far lower levels of awakeness in our students than what we should have. So in my quest to answer this quintessential question, I've been researching for the last 2 decades this relationship between an awake state and gratitude, which I define as the acknowledgement of what we receive and wanting to give back in some way. So, in this quest to find an answer to how we relate to how the relationship between gratitude and the awake state plays itself out, I had a really exciting day one day when I'd heard and read that the word thinking and thanking come from the same word, and I wanted to find this out for myself. So I went down to the university library this one day and went into the reference section and started to smell the waft of really old books as I went into the area, and it got stronger as I got to the etymological dictionary section, and then it got even stronger as I pulled out Eric Partridge's etymological dictionary and had that old book smell of really, really greasy, and I opened the front page and it was published in 1958, but the last time it had been taken out was 1963. So there it was, just waiting in the wings for me to come and pick up this book. And I was really, really excited as I started shifting through the pages and I got to the word thinking. And one of the most wonderful discoveries for me was that the word think and thank come from the same word, which is the word thonk. Isn't that neat? Don't you reckon that's just so fantastic? So, what I would like to propose to you today for the rest of my talk is the proposition that if we thank while we think in a more awake and engaged way. I'll just say that again because I love saying it. If we thank while we think better. So on this same day, I happened to be going back to teach a class at university, which is not a teacher education class, it was another class that I was teaching. Interestingly enough, this class was called Thinking and Writing at University. And this class was taken by students who come into the university through alternative pathways. So refugee students, students who, mature age students, students with a disability, and many of those students who find it difficult to get into university education. And I remember one of the students in this class very well because a few weeks before on our first class, her name's Sally, Sally was waiting outside the Coke machine outside the classroom looking very tentative. And when all the other students started rolling in, Sally wasn't one of them. So I went outside and saw her aiming for the exit door, and I encouraged her to come in and just experiment with the first class. And at the end of that class, Sally came up to me in tears because for the last 15 years, she'd really wanted to come to university, and she'd been bringing up 4 kids on her own and found it really difficult to actually make that break with that life and take up university study. So this was going to be the very first day of this new life for Sally, and she just wanted to walk out the door. And Sally, like many of the other students in this class, had this incredible awakeness that I'm talking about. And what I discovered through examples and getting to know Sally's story and the story of many of these other students is that although they didn't come into university education with the traditional thinking skills in terms of their confidence and skills in thinking, what they came in with was this gratitude for the opportunity to have an education, gratitude for the opportunity to learn. And I saw this really develop really strongly in Sally as the weeks progressed. So what is it about gratitude that makes this relationship between gratitude and thinking, that makes it so alive? Well, Sally's class stood in stark contrast with the other classes that I was teaching, teacher education classes, where the education was quite easy for these students, and they were they didn't necessarily come in with that same awake state. In fact, what they came in with was the opposite of gratitude, where many students, I wouldn't say all students, but many students came into the class with a feeling, with an attitude of taking things for granted and feeling entitled, and in many ways that would turn into resentment because they weren't getting what they were paying for. So these students weren't really aware of how much that state was actually taking their awakeness away. So even though these students had greater opportunities, they weren't necessarily bringing what Sally and the other students were bringing into the classroom. So one of the ways of understanding what gratitude is and how it can really make an impact is to understand it as the opposite of these other states, which is taking things for granted and a sense of entitlement and a resentment. Another way of understanding gratitude and the impact this might have on the teaching and learning process is to first of all think about gratitude in terms of 2 steps. So the first step is that we start to feel an appreciation. So I might ask you now to be thinking about what you appreciate about being here at TED. And if you haven't already been thinking about this, that appreciation might imbue this present moment with a sense of taking it, taking this very preciously. But then not only is the feeling important, but also I believe gratitude becomes true gratitude when we act on it in some way. So if we were to think about what you're going to do after TED to be able to express gratitude for this opportunity by perhaps telling other people about this TED event, that would be true gratitude, because it's an action that you're imparting, building on from your feeling. So one of the other things that we need to be thinking about in terms of gratitude is that and I'm sure you're thinking about that right now, is what about gratitude in times of adversity? It's really fine to be thinking about gratitude when things are going really well, but what about gratitude when things are going really badly? And you might be, if you're anything like one of the many teachers that come along to my gratitude workshops in schools, they'd be thinking, oh no, I've got to go along and now I've got to learn about gratitude, and I've just had this horrible day with really, really difficult students, and gratitude just seems like the least likely thing that I'd like to be putting into practice. And indeed, this is a really important question, because gratitude is very complex when we think about it in terms of adversity, isn't it? Because we don't really want to be thinking about putting a positive veneer over a negative situation, which is crying out for attention. And that's not what gratitude is. But I would like to propose quite a radical view here, and that's one where we can be thinking about not necessarily gratitude for the adverse situation, but gratitude for something outside the adverse situation that can help us build our resilience when we're going through adversity. So for those teachers, for example, who are having a difficult time, they can be thinking about gratitude for the school that they're teaching in, or gratitude for the students that are not so difficult, or the gratitude for the opportunity to teach. But then you might be thinking also, perhaps, we can't feel grateful all the time. And I agree, we can't feel grateful all the time. You've probably noticed in me that it's not necessarily gratitude that I'm feeling right now, but it's absolute fear and terror. And I'm certainly not really standing up here as Madam Gratitude. I'm standing up here as somebody who's very scared doing a TED Talk. But I'm not feeling nearly as much fear as what Sally felt when she was entering that first class, and which many students feel. So Sally wasn't bringing a feeling of gratitude. What Sally was bringing to the class was something much deeper than feelings. And it's a dimension of self that I call the inner attitude. It's the outlook that we bring to the situation. So it's not that we need to be feeling gratitude all the time, but we can bring our inner attitude of gratitude to the situation. So I'd like to introduce you to how I introduce this to my students. And it's something that I researched in my PhD for the last for 6 years. And my PhD thesis is this thick, and it's probably also gathering dust somewhere like the etymological dictionary was. And unfortunately, this whole 6 years study can be represented in one diagram. So this one diagram says everything that I studied for 6 years. What a pity that I wasted 6 years of my life, because I can say it in one diagram, and it's even a simple diagram. So in this one diagram, I have a whole theory about education that I really want you to believe in and can help us understand about awakeness. So what I'm arguing here is that most of the time we think about education as taking place in this time here. So we think about education as a time that's taking place inside the classroom or during the study activity, or when we're doing some study of reading books, etc. We think about education being about that. So most educational theories are about group work, or how to get students engaged in the classroom, how to sort of teach with the use of technology, etc. But what I want to say is that the actual time before students enter into the classroom and before teachers start teaching is where we need to be thinking about education. So I want us to expand our notion of education to be not only in the time when you're in the study activity, but the time before it. And I also want to propose that if we prepare our innermost attitude and be thinking about what we're grateful for about that opportunity where we're about to go into the study in the same way that Sally and many of those other students did, then we actually have much richer learning and much awakeness that isn't there if we do the opposite, which is come in with an inner attitude of resentment or taking a sense of entitlement. So I believe that the quality of learning and the quality of thinking that takes place is really dependent upon the inner attitude that we bring to the learning situation. And I'd just like to give you an example of this where I taught optometry students at the University of New South Wales some time ago. And I invited them into a state of preparedness by asking them to think about what they were grateful for in terms of their eyes. So I asked them to think about gratitude for the things that their eyes could see. And I also invited them into thinking about having this profession of optometry and the gratitude that they could have for being able to look after other people's eyes. So many of the students started to change their attitude, which they admitted was one of sense of entitlement and taking things for granted, to being grateful for their eyes, and they approached their university studies with that attitude. And as a result of that, many of them reported that they became more engaged in their studies, more focused, more curious, more able to really pay attention, all those words that I started with in terms of being awake. And one student said that even though he'd been studying the science of the eye for the last year, he hadn't ever thought about gratitude for his own eyes. So I believe that we can actually practice this state of preparedness, gratitude, before we actually do any activity, not only study activity. And I really believe that as a result of that, and what many of my students and the teachers that I've been working with have shown me, is that we can actually generate a much more awake state. So I believe also that if we practice a state of preparedness and if we're grateful before we actually do an activity, then we can be thanking while we think, and we can truly thonk. Thank you very much.